us today. We are truly grateful to have you here with us. Today's topic is one which is extremely important. It is disability sensitization. And with her today with us is Miss Aisha Durisu, our amazing guest trainer. Aisha Dirisu is the executive director of the Peniel Foundation, a non-governmental organization that inspires, empowers, and advocates for youths living with disabilities to attain their full potential. She is a trained development economist from the University of East Anglia, Norwich, United Kingdom, and a monitoring and evaluation consultant with the government parastatal in Nigeria. She has a certification in non-profit leadership and management from the prestigious Lagos Business School, Nigeria, Yalai alumni, and an African Changemaker Fellow who was invited in 2019 to participate in the World Youth Forum, Egypt. We're truly delighted to have you here with us, Aisha, and I'd now like to hand over the mic to you. Over to you, Aisha.
Hi, good morning. It's morning where I am right now. It's a raining Thursday morning, and I'm really so excited to be here to meet amazing professionals. Like, it's a privilege to be here today. Thank you very much for having me, PixX organization. So I'm just going to go right to today's presentation. I'll try to share. Um, mm, okay, can't. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out which to share. Hmm, I can't seem to. I'm sorry, I can't seem to. For some weird reason, I'm not. Okay, for can you view my screen?
We cannot see it, Aisha.
All right. Mm,
Perhaps you could email it to us and you can start with the
Okay, maybe
presentation.
I think that that would be perfect.
Yeah.
So let me just send it to you and um okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going to be talking while it's uploading to send. I'll just like I'm sure are we can can people chat or do I just present? I just wanted to ask if anyone is familiar with persons living with disabilities. Maybe you have them as friends, as colleagues, or as family. Basically, is are there people here that are very familiar with persons living with disability interaction on a daily basis, or just once in a while? If we have anyone like that, you can just indicate in the comment section. Okay, I think I've sent it in here, so that should be fine.
I'll just check it.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I guess I can't see any message, so I guess probably most of us are a bit new. So today we're going to be having like autism and behavior. Wow, yeah. Oh, you've interacted with several in your family, classmates in college is visually impaired. Wow, that's amazing. So, that this makes my work a bit easier because we have people here who have classmates, family members, and they interact with persons living with disability on a daily basis. Why it's very important for me to have to know this is because there are times that I interact with people, and when we start talking, they're like, "Oh, I don't even see persons living with disabilities. Like, I just hear about them, but I really don't interact with them, and I feel a bit, awkward. I don't know what to say, how to act, and all that." So this is why this training is very important because a lot of us are going to be interacting with either kids with disabilities or just people with disability generally, and it's just good to have a bit of knowledge on what to do, what not to do, and the appropriate terminologies and things like that. So basically, today that's just what we are going to be doing, and I'll really appreciate if it's quite interactive as well. So I'm going to start by saying that there are more than 1 billion persons living with a form of disability, and that's about 15% of the population of the world. So I mean that's huge. We have so many people living with disabilities, and when we talk about persons living with disabilities, there were people that were born with disabilities, and there are a lot of people that acquired disabilities along the way. And this is why it's very important for us to be sensitized on disability matters, because I mean, we don't know what can happen tomorrow. I remember sometime 2 years ago, my best friend was involved in an accident, and she she broke her hip, and she had to go through operation and stuff like that, and it took her months to actually be able to walk again. And at that point, she's never had any knowledge whatsoever on what it takes to live with disability. And she was almost going into depression because it was a whole different ball game. The home they were in was not accessible. She didn't just even know how to navigate. So disability is something that could also happen to anyone at any time. What exactly is disability? Most times when people say, oh, disability, it comes from a place of, oh, this person is disabled, or this person has a disability. But the truth is, disability is a societal imposition on people who have impairment, making it more difficult for them to do certain activities or interact with the world around them. For instance, someone who a person who is blind, for instance, if he has access to, let's say he's a student and he has access to his materials, let's say audio materials and accessible materials for him to be able to carry out his job, his studies, there won't really be there's nothing noticeable to show that this person has a disability, because the person is able to do everything everybody's doing in class. He has access to his materials. He has, in an accessible format, braille materials, audio materials. A person who is deaf has access to, let's say, a sign interpreter. So with that, you can't say the person is disabled, because the person will do exactly the same thing that you and I without disability would do. For instance, a person on a wheelchair, if the person wants to access a building and there's no ramp, just stairs, it is the stairs there and the fact that the person cannot access that building that is making that person disabled. The person has an impairment, but the society not making things available, accessible for him, is what is making that person at that point a person with disability. So I just needed to also make that clear. While an impairment is any loss or abnormality, it could be psychological, it could be physiological or anatomic structure or function, whether permanent or temporary. So most people have a sort of impairment. So you hear people, oh, they have hearing impairment, they have visually impaired. They are impaired, but what is making them a person living with disability are those things that are making them not be able to do their daily work or interaction like any other person will do. It's also important for us to know that persons living with disability are amongst the most marginalized group of people in the world. And it's amazing because if you say we have 1 billion people living with disability, how is it that, we are still in a place where they're not being paid attention to? Why is it that we still go to restaurants, we still go to homes, we still have to fight daily for accessibility and inclusion of these people? So, persons living with disability are twice likely to be unemployed than those without disabilities, because we still have a lot of negative attitudes where people believe, oh, because this person have a disability, they cannot do certain jobs, or they can do certain jobs. Or some people believe it's a taboo for them to even employ persons living with disability in their businesses. And we have lower education achievements for children living with disability, because some parents believe, oh, this child has a disability, so therefore there's really no hope for this child. So let me, instead of me wasting my money to send this child to school, let me just keep the child at home and locked up somewhere, or just at home. It can be playing and do whatever they want to do. Let me not waste that time. And because at times it may also involve them having to do extra things like being physically taking the child to school instead of normal saying go to school, walk to school, and things like that. There are less economic participation. I mean, if you're not employing persons living with disabilities, it's very, very likely that their economic participation will be very low, and higher rates of poverty than people living with disabilities. Okay, yeah, I'm on the fourth slide now, or the fifth one. Okay, yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. So the next one now. So there are various types of disability. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about types of disabilities. Some people said, oh, we've seen someone who is deaf, that's hearing impairment. This includes a person who is deaf, or has hearing impairment. Mobility, this includes a person who uses a wheelchair, cane, or other assistive devices. We have intellectual or developmental disability. This includes a person who has autism. Someone said they've also interacted with an autistic person before. Someone with Down syndrome and cerebral palsy. And we also have people who are visually impaired or blind. This includes those who are blind or have low vision. Speech or communication. This includes person who has aphasia or stutter. Learning disability, a person who is dyslexia or HDH. Mental health or emotional disability. Now we have those have also been included into a form of disability. And this a person who has that bipolar disorder, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder. And disability just crosses all forms of. And the funny thing is, while most people feel like, oh, a disability is just for certain people, anyone could have a disability. Doesn't matter your ethnicity, your religion, your social, or your financial back, background. Anyone could actually come up with disabilities. And I'd like to also talk about the misconceptions that we have about persons living with disabilities. Why it's very important for us to talk about the misconceptions is because this misconception is one of the reasons why we still have a lot of negative attitudes when it comes to person living with disabilities. And until we begin to pay attention to these things and ensure that appropriate measures are done to solve this problem, we will still keep having discrimination, and we'll still keep having the same old negative attitudes toward persons living with disabilities. So the first is reasonable accommodation is expensive. So I remember a Penel Foundation, when we were trying to get employment for some of our young people living with disability after their mentoring program with us, and approaching some businesses and some organizations, we came across organization that felt that reasonable accommodation is really going to be too expensive. I can't afford to have a person living with disability on my team. And we had to actually sit them down and educate them. When we say reasonable accommodation, don't get it all mixed up in your head and feel like, oh, I have to break down the building and, have a new building because my building is not accessible. Why not have a remote staff? So instead of, if your building, for instance, like one of the clients said, your client did amazing well with the interview, but unfortunately we need someone physically present there, and our building is not accessible. And I said reasonable accommodation is having the person work remotely. Or for instance, if it's school, how can we make the materials? And thank God, COVID-19 is not a good thing, but it also happened and opened our eyes to see the possibilities, especially for persons living with disability. I had this conversation with an employer in January 2020, and by March, COVID-19 happened, and the employer made all his staff remote. So COVID-19, all schools now, most schools do their schools online. And if we're going to do that online, we also need to begin to think of ways to include persons living with disabilities. How are we going to make the materials accessible? How are we going to make sure that someone who is deaf can watch a video? Or how can I make sure that someone who is blind can still, participate? So these are the kind of things when we talk about reasonable accommodation. And it could also just be flexible working hours. Instead of me resuming work at this time, can I resume earlier or later, and things like that. So 44% of the accommodation required by persons living with disabilities, it actually have no financial cost. This is a research that was conducted by World Bank, and they realized that loads of reasonable accommodation that is being asked from persons living with disability actually has no financial cost attached to them. Not saying that you won't have financial cost in some, but 44% shows that there's no financial cost. A lot of people just feel like, oh, persons living with disability are sick. Oh, because this person is blind, the person is sick. So you see, and the truth is, most persons living with disability are not sick. Neither is disability contagious. And we still have places where they believe that, oh, a person with disability has some magical powers, so let's keep them, lock them up somewhere, and when we need certain things that we want to happen to us, we go to them. And but all these are just, it's not real. They are all just myths and misconception. You see, I went out for dinner with one of my friend who happens to be blind, and we're chatting, and the waiter came and asked me for my order. I gave my order, and the waiter now asked me, oh, what's the order of you order for your friend? And I turned and said to her, my friend is only blind. My friend can speak. My friend can hear you. So have that conversation with her. We've already discussed what's available. It's unfortunate that we've not gotten to that place yet where we go into a restaurant and there are braille menus as well. So I've explained to her what is available. So you ask her for her order and not, ask me for her other. So we still have misconceptions where people feel like, oh, a person living with disability is blind, or the person, because the person is blind, the person can't understand, or I can't have conversation with the person. I have to have a conversation with the person with the aid. So all those things are just myths and misconception. Assuming persons living with disability are not qualified or skillful. Oh my God, we've had this conversation in Penel Foundation over and over and over again. A lot of businesses, organizations, individuals, just you hear people say, oh really, the people with disability I see are those ones begging on the road or around. Are there really persons living with disability that are like educated and like have the qualification and the skills I need? We have to go daily, explaining to them that we have so many people living with disability that are qualified, more qualified than the people that you're even, that you have on your team, and you complain daily of, oh, my staffs are not skilled enough. We have so many full of talented persons living with disability with amazing skills. We have a youth with disability who is blind, but is an amazing website designer. And I remember telling a business owner who was looking for website design, oh, I have a person with disability. And she asked, what sort of disability? I said, the person is blind. It's a person that is blind. And he said, how can a blind person design my website? It's not even going to work. It's not possible. So these are the kind of things that we're trying to, the type of misconceptions we're trying to break, so that people begin to be more open-minded and begin to look out for skills regardless of whether the person has a disability or not. Policymakers and employers should think of human rights and business case first. Everyone has a right to decent work, and every company should seek the best source of talent instead of going on and on every day about, we don't have brilliant students or enough talented students or workers. Just leave it open, and you see a lot of persons living with disabilities that are actually skillful. So, importance of disability awareness in schools. Disability awareness is about enlightening, educating society about disability and how we can bring change. The truth is, if students from an early age get involved and begin to understand, are disability aware, a lot of our work is going to be second to none. Students become better people in the society. Researchers found that disability awareness at schools have led young children to gain empathy and have positive attitudes. So instead of them having all those negative attitude of seeing a person living with disability and moving away because to them is strange and weird, all those negative attitude is going to be minimal or second to none. Inclusive classrooms and inclusive education. This is one thing that we are all championing for, because and it ensures classrooms become more inclusive and diverse, allowing children to learn from their peers regardless of disability. And I always say this, I have a 3-year-old daughter. Imagine that in her school, she's in preschool, and imagine that in her class, there's a child with disability, a child who is blind, a child who is deaf, a child who is on wheelchair. And she does that from 3 years old now. By the time she's 10, if she interacts with person with disability daily, it's not going to be weird. Imagine if her best friend, for instance, is someone on a wheelchair. Automatically she will come home and tell me, Mom, my best friend is coming, and there's no way she's going to have access into our home because there's no ramp. I'll start unconsciously looking for ways to ensure that my house is accessible, because my child's best friend, that is just 3, has a disability. Unconsciously, by the time my child is like 4 or few months, if her best friend is deaf, she will have learned sign language because that's all she knows. That's her best friend, and they need to interact. So that is why inclusive education is very important. Not only because we want persons living with disability to just come and learn, no, because also for every child it becomes a norm and they grow up seeing persons living with disability as that is all we know. We don't know anything different. Our best friends have disability. It's normal. So if my best friend, for instance, has a disability and I have maybe an opening in my workplace, I'm going to tell her apply and tell the HR and support, oh, this is my best friend is applying. I'm giving a word, that's a referral. And if the person is like, oh, the person has a disability, I will school you because this is my best friend. I know her capabilities, her abilities. And, we all unconsciously become disability advocates when we have inclusive education and from scratch, we're interacting with persons living with disabilities. So disability ethic etiquette. So this like when approaching persons living with disabilities, there are some, a lot of people tell me that, oh, I feel awkward actually talking to, not awkward, but I really don't know what to say, how to say it, when to say it, and I don't sound a certain way when it comes to persons living with disability. So that's why most times we like to have these conversations. Understanding is the most important step to disability inclusion. Most people are not comfortable relating to persons with disability because of stereotypes and lack of knowledge on disability issues. Hence, the need to have more trainings like this to get more people informed and feel more comfortable relating to persons living with disabilities. A lot of us are going to be relating with persons living with disabilities. So it's very important for us to know some of these things, and it just becomes part of us, a norm. And we'll also be able to educate others, our students, and people around as well. Next slide, please. So these are guidelines to help interact better with persons living with disabilities. The first one that I see happen a lot is when people tend to, maybe they see a person living with disabilities or a person on a wheelchair and they lean on the wheelchair. Don't lean on the wheelchair. Sit next to the person's wheelchair at eye level and have a conversation. That's more ideal, instead of either standing and the person has to always look up to you to have a conversation, or instead of leaning on their wheelchair, you can just sit down. And if people will be on an eye to eye level, now enjoy, on an eye-to-eye level, that is more ideal. Speak directly to a person with disability and not their companion. A person who is blind or using the wheelchair can hear you, can have a conversation with you, and they can just relate like any other person. So this refers to that story I gave earlier on about having dinner with my friend. Include persons living with disability in conversations. Persons living with disabilities have opinion about various subject matters. Don't just assume otherwise. So we have situations where teachers assume that students with disabilities, so when they're having sex education, they don't get students with disability involved because they believe that, oh, and this person has a disability, so the person will not even be thinking of having sex in the future or something like that. So you see that they don't have those kind of inter conversations with the students or even adults. There are some topics that people feel like, oh, this person has a disability, so they won't have an opinion about it. No, that's wrong. Include them in the conversation, ask for their opinion, and allow them, share their views on things. This also helps them in their confidence and in their relationship with others. Don't assume you know what a person with disability is going through because you have a friend or family with a similar disability. It's very important for us not to think, my friend is blind too, but my friend can do this. How come you can't? Oh, my friend doesn't do this. Maybe just being lazy. Every person with disability is different. You can be in a room with people with people with disability with the same type of disability, but their experiences are different. What they go through on a daily basis is totally different. So don't just assume that because you know one or two persons with disability, that automatically means that you know how every other person with that particular disability will be. Offer your arm, your elbow when you want to assist a person who is blind, and not just grab or drag their hand. The first thing is to ask. So I remember the first interaction I had years ago with a blind person. It was when I was in the UK. I was in the UK, and the person was just by the traffic light. And when the traffic light said we should go, I noticed that the person was still standing. And I just went and dragged the person's hand. Oh, let's go, let's go. And the lady was really nice to explain to me that, oh, I'm sorry, I don't need help. When next you come, and I'm like, oh, I felt a bit about like, oh, but I'm just trying to help this person. Why did she say she doesn't need help? Anyways, and I left. But knowing what I know now, the first thing to do is to ask, hello, my name is so and so. Will you need help? And if the person says, yes, I need help, you don't just grab the person's hand and walk the person off. Most times, a blind person will offer you their elbow. So you put your own hand too, and you guys walk side by side. That is a better way of rendering help to a blind person when you ask and the person says yes, they need help. The next slide, please. Don't shout to a person who is deaf or have an hearing impairment. So there are times that people feel, oh, the person, she's wearing a hearing aid, so I need to shout for her to hear well. Or no, she most times read lips. Let me shout so that the person might hear me because the person hears a little bit. That's what a friend of mine, she hears a little bit. So if I shout, it'll be clearer, she will hear. But no, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't help at all. Your shouting does not help at all. So it's better you speak in your normal tone and make sure the person can see you, because there are times that they might even be reading your lips. So if you're shouting or you're being too fast, it won't help at all. So just use your normal tone and address the person. Avoid starting. Okay, sorry, that was a type. Avoid standing over a person with wheelchair, as the person will have to be looking up the whole time. That is something that I've spoken about a little bit. Zina, I would like to ask, do we stop in between for questions and take some comments? Because I'm not really reading the comments. Or should I just go ahead then after we have the Q&A?
It's absolutely up to you. If you want to do some questions right
Yeah,
now, Aisha,
that's
up
fine. I
to you.
can take some questions and I can seek some. Um, if you can help read out some comments as well, so
Sure, I
I
will.
can. Yeah,
So I'll read out both the comments and both the questions as well. And
yeah.
Lillian says it's good to have you here, and she's interacted with several in her school. I guess that's the part when you asked everyone about autism. So the
Oh,
first question is
thank
officially
you.
by Arijit. who asks, many a times students with special needs get built by, I think that's bullied by their peers. How do we keep an eye on such bullies and check their wrong behavior?
Okay. So thank you very much. This is an amazing question. A lot of kids bully persons, other children with disability, because they've not been educated about it. So we need to begin to normalize those kind of conversations. It's just how kids bully other kids. Even if they don't have kids with disability in that school, they bully other kids that they feel, they're either more powerful or something over. And the same way you educate the child why you don't bully this person is the same way you educate the other kids why you don't bully kids with disability, or make them understand what the disability is all about. Because at times I've seen some kids bully children with disability because they don't get it. Why am I talking to her and she's not answering me? So to them it's more of a defense mechanism, because they feel like she's being rude. I'm talking, she's not answering me. That's rude. They don't know that the child cannot hear them. The child is deaf. So that is where you come in as an educator to explain what it means to be deaf. And the way you're going to explain to an adult is totally different from the way you're going to explain to kids. So you're going to go to the minimal, how now as I make it sound, you understand me, you can hear me. But let's say, for instance, Lillian or Kazim or any the other child cannot hear. So that is why she's not responding to you. And explain how she can interact better. She can only understand when there's someone interpreting to her, or she can only understand, so they begin when you have those conversations with the kids regularly and every time, they become more familiar. And you see children they are more empathetic than adults. They'll be the ones to go back home, tell their parents about this disability, and the new student they have now that has this form of disability and what it's about. So that's why it's also very important for us to educate the kids. And there's no child that is too young. My child knows about disability from when she started talking, from 2. So when she knows that someone is blind, she understands it. She understands somebody is deaf. When she sees someone, she has aunties and uncles that are on wheelchair because they are my friends and they are deaf. So she understands it. So it's easy for her to relate. So it's the same way, just explain it to them.
Right. Thank you so much for that answer. Should I read the next question?
Yes, please.
Yep. Tepo asks, is there a certain degree to which visual impairment cannot be considered a disability in terms of being short sighted or long sighted? Because in my country, if you wear spectacles, you're not considered disabled.
Okay. Thank you. That's an amazing question. So it's not everyone. People with regular, okay, I don't call it regular, but people with eye short-sightedness, eye problems like short-sighted, long-sighted, no, they're not. Those are not people with um, visual impairment. When you go to your optician, if you notice, they put even before they know the strength of your glasses, they put different things for you to say the colors, how the letters and things like that. So it's the opticians most time, from how you can see, how from what you can see and what you can't see, they are the ones that declare your vision, whether it's really bad, you can't see. There are people that no matter how big you magnify the letters, they really can't see it. So there's a way that the opticians actually measure the degree, while some can't even see at all. So those ones are blind. But for the visually impaired, you have to really not see your sight has to really be bad for you to be considered visually impaired. But when you're just wearing glasses, because you're short-sighted or long-sighted, that's not considered visual impairment. I
Thank
hope
you.
that helps.
Thank you, Aisha. I hope that answered your question, Tapo. Moving on to the next question, which is, I think, by Miss Sita SK. I have noticed in tribal areas, many parents of differently abled children are unwilling to send their children to school. How to change their attitudes?
Thank you very much for that question. And that is why it still comes down to knowledge, to sensitization, and to knowledge and sensitization. So I had an interview with someone that has a person with Down syndrome over the weekend on my social media platform. It was on Instagram Live. And I had so many people come into Penel Foundation's direct message to say, are you sure this person has Down syndrome? Are you very sure? Because she doesn't talk like or look like someone with Down syndrome. And the when she was talking, when she was sharing her story, what she does now is she runs a non-profit to help parents understand that because your child has Down syndrome does not mean the child cannot go to school. She is now an advocate. She travels all around the world. She was in the US. She has won several awards, in short. And she has Down syndrome. And she went to school. She's a lawyer. She finished her school. She was called to bar, but because a lot of parents, they don't see. So the first thing is they are afraid of the way the community is going to react to their children. I went to a park one day, and a lady came with her kid with autism. And guess what? A lot of parents went and were taking their children away from the swing. Like, no, 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 don't go near my child. No, no, don't go near my child. Because to them, they felt that, oh, this child, one even said, oh, that child is mad. Run, run, pick my child away from there. That's because of that kind of reaction, that mom will feel a certain way. She won't want her child to go through that. So she feels the best way for her to do it is by hiding the child. But guess what? That doesn't help. Now, what we do is at that park, I went and I educated a lot of the parents there. And before we left there, a lot of them went to meet this mom. We're having conversation with her, exchange their numbers, and we're willing to even have play dates. So we need to educate them on why they need to bring their child to school. Show them people that have similar disabilities. So that's another thing that we do. Show them people that have similar disabilities and have gone ahead to do amazing things. That's one of the things we do in Penel Foundation when we say we inspire. So we bring established persons living with disabilities to come and share their stories so that parents and also upcoming persons living with disabilities begin to see what's possible. Begin to see that because you have a disability doesn't mean that they are going to hand you bread and butter. No. This world is a playing field. You need to show your value, show what's possible before you can get called to the table. So you need to make the parents to begin to see why they should educate their children. If you don't want your child to be dependent tomorrow, if you want your child to be like that person that is giving TED Talks, if you want your child to be like that person that has a disability but is breaking the bounds, it starts with you, the parent. You need to empower your child, push your child. The lady I had the interview with about cerebral Down syndrome. She said to me that her mom made sure she does everything. That whenever someone comes and say this is not possible, she says, her mom says, because they said it's not possible, you need to try it and show what is possible. And because of that, she has gone ahead to show what is possible. So it just all comes down to knowledge and sensitization. Thank you. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much for that, Aisha. And would you, right, we do have a few more questions. One is from Ria, who asks, what should be done if a child is not accepted by his family members and hence is treated poorly at home by their siblings and parents?
So I don't know where you are at, but there are a lot of organizations now that if you can first of all help the student by searching for organizations that deal with persons living with disabilities or children living with disabilities, that will help. And secondly, that is why you are here today, to be sensitized about disability, and you can help the parent and the parent first. It's very easy once the parents are supportive. It's easy for the child to thrive. It's easier for the child, and you can also be the one that helps the child. Do you understand? So there are always these teachers in your school that have helped you to believe in yourself outside your parents. So when you go to school, there are some teachers that have either helped you in your journey to believe more in yourself or to make you feel less of a person. So you as the teacher can be that person, that voice, that extra voice the child hears daily, to build its confidence, to tell the child, you can do this, this is possible. You can, and show the child, as I said earlier, search on the internet, go to YouTube, you see a lot. We have so many examples of people that have gone ahead and done amazing things. So that is also a way you can help the child.
Thank you so much for that answer. Very aptly spoken, Aisha, if I may add. Nem asks, is arthritis a disability?
So it's not a straightforward answer I'm going to give, because you cannot be the person to judge for a person's disability. So for instance, there are people with arthritis that are able to carry out their day-to-day activities without any issues, while there are some people with arthritis that their arthritis are so bad that most times they either have to use crutches or be wheeled on their wheelchair. So if they are not, if they cannot, if they are in that spectrum of, if they're in that spectrum, yes. And the truth of the matter is, it's not in our place to decide if a person has a disability or not. If a person tells you, I have a disability, you have no reason doubting the person, because the person definitely has a disability to agree to accept to having a disability. So if the person with arthritis tells you that I have a disability, you have no reason to doubt the person. I hope that answered your question. But that doesn't mean that everyone with arthritis has a disability as well. So that's why I say it's not a very straightforward answer.
If I may, Nem has just added in the chat, I think, if you want to respond to that.
Yeah.
Nem is not asking you to judge, she's asking because for herself, because she also has arthritis. That's why I think.
Okay, so Nem, for you, is your arthritis, is it, if it's stopping you from carrying out your day-to-day activity? So if you're in so much pain, I'm sure when you go to your doctor, you have like, they advise you on what to do. For instance, or if you're in so much pain, you could use crutches or you could use a wheelchair, depending on. So it's going to actually depend on what your situation is exactly. If your arthritis is stopping you from carrying out your day-to-day activities, meds is not helping, and you actually need to, you know, you need to put tell them that you have a disability, I mean, go ahead, just ask from your doctor. Your doctor will be the best person to decide what spectrum you are in and what works, if this can actually be classified as a disability based on the results they have, or if it cannot. Aside that, nobody else will be able to tell you that, oh, this is a disability or not. So just ask your doctor if from their diagnosis and all the results they've done, if you fall under a person with disability. And if you do, why not declare yourself that you have a disability and you need social accommodation. And the truth is, if there's any reasonable accommodation you will need from your employer, from anyone, feel free to ask. Don't feel like you need to clarify to them why you have a disability, or what your disability is all about, or whether they will feel is a disability enough for certain accommodation. No, just state your case and state what your needs are. Because at times, if you don't ask, they won't know and they can't help you. Okay, she said that helped her a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Would you like to continue
Okay, yeah,
fielding
I'll
questions?
continue and take the remaining questions at the end, because I can see that our
Yeah, we
time is
do have very
almost, yeah.
enthusiastic fellows and volunteers in the so they just
Yeah.
yeah. You may continue. Please let me know when to scroll and all. Thank you so much.
Next slide, please. Okay. Communication. There are so many terminologies that I know a lot of us will have to drop today. We'll be using it, but today, because we've been sensitized and we are aware, we're going to stop using them. So the first one, the positive language empowers people and helps them feel respected and important. When writing or speaking about people who have a disability, it is important to put the person first, usually addressing them by the name or including them as a member of a group, such as a student or a co-worker, a group designation. Really, if you notice, since I've been talking, I will always say either the person is blind, the person on the wheelchair, the person is deaf. You will never hear me say the blind, the deaf, the retard. No, those language, you can't use that. You can say so if you don't know the person's name, always use a person first language, because I'm sure that if you know someone with a disability, it sounds more pleasant to say the person who is blind, the person who is deaf, than that blind person. The blind, the deaf, those words are really not, it doesn't make the person feel respected or empowered. So use affirmative phrases like person with an intellectual disability, person with a cognitive disability, person with developmental disability, or a person with disability, or people with disability. Don't use words like retard, mentally defective, mentally retarded. Those kind of words does make the person feel less of themselves. You can say person who is blind, person who has low vision, not the blind. You can say person with a disability, not the handicapped or the disabled. Always use person first. Person who is deaf instead of the deaf. Or I hear a lot of people say dumb. You cannot call person dumb, someone dumb, no matter what. Like it doesn't even sound right. You get? Person who is hard of hearing, instead of saying the person that suffered hearing loss, or words like that. I know a lot of us have used words like maybe the disabled, the blind, but now we've learned that we should always use a person language, positive language, people first before adding the disability. Next slide, please. person who has multiple sclerosis, not saying words like afflicted with multiple sclerosis, person with cerebral palsy, not cerebral palsy victim, person with epilepsy, person with seizure disorder. You will not just say epileptic person or that person epileptic, or things like that. You can say a person who uses a wheelchair, not say someone that is confined or restricted to a wheelchair. Person with a physical disability, not crippled. We know a lot of people use words like crippled, lame, deformed, and words like that. Unable to speak, uses synthetic speech instead of dumb or mute. So instead of you saying, oh, that person is dumb, you hear people say deaf and dumb or things like that. No, the person is deaf and the person is unable to speak, or the person uses synthetic speech. Next slide, please. So we're talking about disability. What is disability inclusion? This means individuals with disability, including individuals with disability in everyday activities, and ensuring they have access to resources and opportunities. So you can only say you're practicing disability inclusion, whether in your school, whether at work or wherever, when you make sure that persons living with disability are included in their everyday's activity. This refers to design of products. So for instance, if you're a teacher, how accessible are your materials to other students with disability? Your device, your service, the environment. So for instance, if you have a student using a wheelchair, are the aisles that they pass through, is it narrow? And do other students just put things there? These are little things you can check. Always make sure you keep the aisles clear because of other students. This is also helpful not only to the person but for everybody. Anyone can trip off, but most especially so that the person is able to have access in and out. Next slide, please. Accessibility is a process of creating products, that I've said. Basics of disability inclusion, that's barriers persons living with disability face. A lot of these I've touched earlier on, so I'm not just going to be going into too much details. Physical barriers, that's narrow aisles, which I've said, stairs, not putting up ramps, dim lights, and clogged passages. Technology and communication, that's inaccessible websites or content. So as a teacher bringing out content for your students, make sure that the contents are accessible to all forms of disabilities. Basically, organization barrier, absence of proactive policies that facilitate the advancement of persons living with disability, or knowledge about accommodation. So for instance, organizations that have not sensitized their staffs or people around them about disability issues. Legislative barriers, those are policies and laws in place protecting the rights of persons living with disabilities. And negative attitude, that's what we've been talking about since. Inaccurate beliefs, misconceptions about persons living with disability. We spoke exclusively about that earlier on. Next slide. So key concept to disability inclusion, how can we address the barriers? Number one is accessibility. Inclusion and accessibility are two, like they come hand in hand. You cannot include persons living with disability without having accessibility. So many accessibility, and the funny thing is, a lot of accessibility measures that are taken, it doesn't benefit only the person living with disability. How many times have you been to a mall that has a ramp and you use that ramp you use your trolley to pass the ramp? I remember when I had my baby and I used to push my baby ramp. I always look for places with ramps because that's the only way I can push my baby ramp up and down. So imagine it's not just going to benefit persons living with disability alone. It's going to also benefit persons living without disabilities. I'm sure there are a lot of us that it happens to me a lot. There are times I'm on social media, maybe I don't want to listen to the voice. Maybe I'm in a place that other people are there and I'm not with my earpiece. I mute my phone, but I read these transcriptions on the videos instead of listening to the wordings. And guess what? When we tell people, ensure that the videos you're putting out, it has transcriptions. They're like, I don't need it. That video is not going to be accessible to a person who is deaf, because they can't hear you, but by the time they see the transcription, they can read it. And it's not only helpful to them, it's helpful to people like me that at times mute my phone to just read through these transcriptions. So these are little ways that we can become disability inclusive. Then reasonable accommodation. I've spoken about reasonable accommodation so much that I'm sure that a lot of you, after living today, once you see reasonable accommodation, you just remember persons living with disability and you remember all we've said. So reasonable accommodation is just making adjustments on any individual basis to making learning, easy for them. How can I make learning easier for maybe my student that is blind or my student that is deaf? Ask them. At times, if you don't ask persons living with disability, you might not even know. And it might just be something simple that you will have done to make a reasonable accommodation for them. Next slide. How to have a more inclusive and accessible world. I think that's my last slide. And I left this because it's very important that if at the end of today you take out just one slide, please let it be this. And just always think, how will I make this whole experience more inclusive, easier, accessible for persons living with disability? The first is increase disability representation in leadership, media, business, and politics. I'm sure a lot of us will be like, oh, I'm not a business person. I'm not in media. I don't do politics. So how can I help? Something as little as the students that are in your class, if you have any student with disability, give them leadership roles. Let them start learning earlier to be leaders. Basically, let them begin to because there's underrepresentation of persons living with disability in government, in leadership, in media, in business. And that's because when every other person is being taught how to be a leader, given leadership roles, even little things like acting in schools, persons living with disability didn't have that opportunity. So that's why we need to give them leadership roles as well. Inclusive schools and education, and I've spoken so much about this earlier. Helping students with physical disability to be fully integrated, not only physical disability, any sort of disability. Help them to be fully integrated by ensuring students who have hearing or visual disability or those who use wheelchair, they thrive in regular classrooms. So that's what I've spoken about. If we have them in regular classrooms, you as the teacher, you will also begin to notice how you can help them to make their learning easier and more inclusive. Yeah, an inclusive workplace that I've spoken about as well. So I think the last slide. Okay, yeah. So I saw some people asking me for my email address. Here's my email address, and you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. Check me up, Aishetu Dirisu. On Facebook and on Instagram, we're Penel Foundation, and our website as well is penelfoundation.org.ng. Thank you so much. I had an amazing time. I enjoyed all your interaction. You guys were amazing. You didn't make the presentation boring for me. You made it very exciting. Thank you. And if you have any other question, I'll just take it before.
If I may, Aisha, we do have a few more questions in the chat. If
Yeah,
uh, you
that's
know,
fine.
if
Yeah.
time isn't a problem, we can read those out. I'll read those out. So
Yeah,
the
that's
first is
fine.
by Ananda. Law for teachers, ethically and legally. Is there anything to guide them how to deal with special needs students?
Sorry, I don't understand that.
I think he what Ananda means to say is that Ananda, would you like to unmute? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am.
Hi,
For
another.
Hi, thank you so much. So I would like to say that each and every country and each and every state has their own provincial or federal law for
Mm,
teaching and education. So I hope it is for everywhere. So is there anything in Nigeria or anywhere in general that the teacher, the government especially has launched any laws for teachers that who and how can be dealt with special needs students? Because you know
okay.
the special education is a lot of instruments for classes like special classes and all, but sometimes it is available, sometimes it is not. And even in the
Mm,
developed countries, there is a lot of problem for the special classes continuation.
mm,
So, is
mm.
there anything that we can dealt with physically, um, like a whatever you said, not the use that typical word or something like that. So, is there anything law that had been launched to provide the teachers to deal with special ed students?
Thank you very much for that question, and Ananda. I hope I got the pronunciation properly. So, for we have the UNCRPD. Unfortunately, we don't have laws specific to maybe just schools. We have laws that base, so for instance, for inclusive schools, for inclusive workplace. So you will see laws, for instance, in Nigeria, we've been fighting for years for the disability bill to be passed, and it was finally passed last year. And now we're beginning to work on the implementation. That's the Nigerian disability law. And in that law, it talks about penalties that will happen if organizations don't if organizations don't employ persons living with disability. It talks about schools, penalties that is going to happen if schools don't begin to um, have inclusive classrooms and inclusive educations. It talks about transportation. It talks about everything that has to do with making life easy for persons living with disabilities. So it's now the Ministry of Education that will now pick out that law, let's say the inclusive education, and now say for every school, you must have this percentage of students living with disability. And obviously, for you to have this percentage of students living with disabilities, you have to have special needs, special educators. So you, as either the government decides, the government, so I know a lot of CSOs, that's civil society organizations too. I have some couple of friends in the CSO that are beginning to train teachers on how to deal with students with special needs. And when you have that training, you also go and train others. So you now also become training, you're also now a trainer training others as well. That is the way that, we begin to make sure that if there are no laws in place, a lot of, like before, a lot of school felt the stress in having special needs in my school, I'm not going to go through it. But unfortunately, there's now a law that will penalize you if you don't do the right thing. So now in Nigeria, we have that law, although every organization have 5 years to get that in place because it's a recent law. So there are other countries that have had it for years and they are already implementing it. So if you are not doing what you're supposed to do, as a school owner, a business owner, then there's going to be penalties as well. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Next question is by Adongo Richard, who asks, is there disability course offered in disability universities?
Hmm. That's a nice question because I myself, I've been looking for a disability university, but fortunately, a lot of the universities that do disability courses are abroad. And that is one thing that CSOs in the disability community need to also begin to fight for. But you see, we have special educations. So we have a lot of schools that they don't call it disability, they call it special education. So you can have those courses. We have it in some African and Asia universities. But aside that, if you want to look for a disability course, most times is in the developed countries universities, which I mean we should start looking out for, and we should start asking them to actually give like concessions for us that want to do it basically. And there are also some online courses you can take on disability issues, disability inclusions. Some are free, but some are a few are paid for, but the payment is not so much. So it's worth it. Trust me, it's worth it.
Great answer, Aisha, if I may. Next, we have Lakshita, who asks, what is the importance of inclusive learning? How does it mutually benefit normal children and differently abled children?
Okay, I will assume you were not here when I was passionately talking about that. How it's going to benefit children that don't have a disability is they become better people. They begin to understand, there's something about empathy that if you have empathy, it's easy for you to deal with anybody and you have a smooth transition even in the workplace. That is what children without disability learn. And also they make friends with talented people. Do you know how talented persons living with disabilities are? Most times, persons living with disabilities, they have other senses that are sharper, and your other children learn other skills from them. So it's not only important for persons living with disability, it's also important for persons living with without disability and for us as a whole. I used growing up, imagine yourself growing up and you had friends that are blind, friends that are deaf, friends that they're using wheelchair. By now you will have learned sign language in your adulthood because most of your close friends are deaf. So we won't have to be getting sign interpreters everywhere, because a lot of us automatically will have learned how to sign language, how to be sign interpreters, or how to understand a deaf person. A lot of us will have understood how to relate with people, and we will not have to every day be having disability sensitization, and it will just make life easy for everybody and a world a better place. We're not going to be fighting for rights of persons living with disability because their rights are already there. There are no it will solve so many problems. The poverty problem for persons living with disability, not having workplace, employers having a more diverse, talented pool of people, more talented students, because both those with disability and without disability are there in competitions. So, I mean, it just makes the world a whole better place when we have inclusive education.
Thank you for that answer, Aisha. Next, we have,
Hmm.
just a moment. We have a question. What about the concept of disability schools, since it deepens inferiority in persons with disability that they are special?
Yeah, that's why we are going for inclusive education. We don't want schools with special needs anymore,
Right.
or school for persons living with disabilities. I don't know of other countries. In Nigeria, those schools are abandoned. The facilities practically don't exist. They It's just like you are taking your child there to just go and suffer, and for your child to just feel like, this world is not for persons living with disabilities. Hence why we are saying inclusive schools. Every child goes to mainstream schools where everybody is. So we don't want special school. That is what inclusive classroom, inclusive education is about, where every child can begin to function in regular mainstream schools.
Thank you, Aisha. We have a lot of people who are thanking you, who really love the session,
Oh,
really love the
thank
presentation.
you. Thank
It's
you.
just a load of love from our fellows, volunteers, interns.
Oh,
Really love the
oh, oh.
presentation. We do.
Thank you.
I think we do have one more question from Anwar. Perhaps
Mm.
this is the penultimate question. I think this question is how deal in a country that exists a lack of basic human rights like Somalia. Sometimes disabled people faced with many challenges. How can we reduce bad impacts in psychological problems? Over to
Hmm. Thank you, Awa, for that question. And I'm going to say to you that, in as much as it seems that other countries, I told you Nigeria just passed a law. That law is just got passed last year. Nothing on it has been implemented. So everything about persons with disabilities basic rights, there's nothing that is being right now. Let me tell you, let me explain so that you understand. We have we don't have inclusive schools. So we have a lot of persons, young children with disabilities that don't even go to school. We don't have accessible buildings. I can tell you that 90% of the buildings in my country are not accessible. We don't Transportation for persons with disabilities is next to none, because a person with disability, if you cannot afford to pay for a cab, if you want to go through regular transportation, be ready to suffer a lot. So we still have those problems. And having a conversation also with some disability inclusion advocates in America, Ireland, and other countries. In as much as the developed countries seem as if they have their shit together and they have things, they really don't. They also are still, so it's a journey. One of the things that I would say will help is people like you and I, CSOs, that's civil society organizations, to begin to sensitize people about persons living with disabilities. Because the truth is, before I used to be, oh, it's not fair, it's not fair. Is when I start having conversation with people that understand that the knowledge you have, majority of other people don't have it. So you think that you feel is common sense for people to think about persons with disability. Someone else is not thinking that way. So until we begin to have conversations and begin to normalize conversations about disabilities, we are still going to be in the same place. So that is why it's awesome that you're in today's training, thanks to PeaceX. And we expect you to also, in your own capacity, now begin to, have little sensitization programs for persons living with disabilities. If it's in your school, if it's in your church, if it's in your workplace, until these discussions become a norm and people begin to understand it, we're still going to have the problem. And that's why I gave you my email address. If you need help with someone to even, help with the presentations, or just to have those conversations, I'm always open to have these conversations, because until it becomes a regular conversation, everyday conversation everywhere, we're still going to be having discriminations and, bad impacts, as you said, and those other problems.
That was an absolutely apt point, a very enriching one that I think summarizes the entire discussion that we've been having. And it's
Yes.
truly delightful that your perspective and your insights were truly delightful. At this note, I don't believe I have any more questions from the chat box. Just a lot of thank yous and hugs to you, Aisha, from everyone here.
Oh,
You've
oh.
made, you've made a conversation that really doesn't happen in the conventional discourse very easier. And sorry I interrupted, because I think Amra has a question. Amra, would you like to speak the question? If of course, Aisha, you're if you want
Yeah,
to take
that's
it.
fine. I'm ready. All here.
Thank you so
Hi,
much.
Hi,
Amara.
hi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Oh, thank you. First of all, let me appreciate and extend a profound gratitude for the very very well presentation today. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
yeah, we actually admire your courage for creating new opportunity for underprivileged people. Yeah. So thank you so much for your time always.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my question has to do with I'm from Liberia, but I'm currently studying Mauritius. So my question has to do with it has to do with something that has to do with disabilities. In Liberia, for the past time, we have been experiencing a civil war that leads to so many disability people. So we have like handicap, and we have many youth who are
Never
psychologically
using
ill.
handicap, Amara. We've said that before.
Yeah, and yeah, so I'm just asking a question. I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
That's
so
fine.
yeah. So I have a people. I have I was in a school where many youth because of the negative effect of the Liberian Civil War, many youth has been like psychologically ill. So they normally don't do things like the way normal people should do things. So I just wanted to know, maybe if you are a teacher and you are happens to have such people in your classroom. Okay, what advices could you give the teacher to be able to manage those people in your classroom, especially if they do not do things normally like other people do, like ordinary people do? How should you ensure to manage those people? What advices can you give to teachers about those people?
Okay, so Amara, I would like us to talk through this. I need to understand some certain things. So, because for every person with disability, right, the needs are different. So that's why it's important for you to understand the kind of disability we are dealing with. The
Okay.
the the assistance you're going to give a person on a wheelchair is different from the assistance you're going to give the person that is blind, and is different from the assistance you're going to give someone who is going through a mental health disability.
Okay.
Do you understand? So for
Yes.
each disability, you need to know what disability. I need to know what disability exactly they have. If it's physical disability, then for instance, if it's someone
Okay.
that, okay, go ahead.
Okay. Let me clarify something. For instance, students are in a classroom, okay, when you're giving them lesson, or maybe when the teachers giving them lessons due to their maybe the psychological of the war effect on them, the civil war effect on them, they normally they don't grab lesson as faster as other students. So they are very, very slow in understanding things. Like they don't see things the way other people see it. So most of the time the teachers find it extremely difficult for them to be able to understand the lessons, because the teacher has to keep moving on rather than like going back over things over and over again, because other students also need to move forward.
I get I
So
get you now, Amara. So we're talking now more of mental health disability, right?
yes,
Okay.
something like that.
So just as developmental disability goes, it's not it's not like as straightforward as physical disability. there has to be a specialist involved. So, for instance, a child with autism spectrum, for instance, has to go to an assessment to know what spectrum he falls under, and also the doctor will now give recommendation. Then, when he gets to school, we have special educators, which we spoke about special education. From the results, they know how to interact with that child. The same thing with ADHD, the same thing with mental health. So the first thing is to get a psychologist to, first of all, and maybe because in this part of the world, right, when we talk about psychologists, we have that stigma. People just think that, oh, I will only go and see a psychologist when they will just say, oh, the person is running mad, or maybe the person. No, I go to see a psychologist at times when I'm stressed. You know why? Because there are times that having conversations will actually help me to pinpoint where exactly I'm missing it that ordinarily I wouldn't have been able to do myself. So what a psychologist would do, it's funny that the children that seems as if, oh, you have to go over and over and over again, there might just be a little technique that is needed. And that's why we need them to engage with professionals, not just, and that's why we need our teachers to begin to get trainings on special education. If you're a special educator, you understand the triggers and what the triggers to look out for in a child, and the style of teaching that you can use for that child at every point in time. And that is the only way that it will help that child to be able to learn and assimilate the way he will do that others might not. Does that help?
Yes, yes, it really helped. It really helped. I think what you just said is just a matter of fact that psychologists we help play like a major role in this process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
both
So thank you so much. Yeah,
psychologists,
thank you so much.
yes, psychologists and special education teachers, they will be
Yeah.
able to help. A special education teacher will know what to do when a child is beginning to have like a little distraction, mental health issues. They know the triggers, and they know what tools and what techniques they will use to help that child at that point in time.
Okay.
That answers your
It's
question.
very helpful. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. At this point, I once again reiterate that I don't see any more questions. There are just loads of thank yous and amazing presentation, amazing session.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.